Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this weekly SMI seminar. I acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship on the land on which we meet today. On behalf of the Sustainable Minerals Institute, I pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australia and global society. Today's presentation, Mining, Social Performance, an element of a strategic review, is presented by Dr. Anthony Kung, Senior Research Fellow in the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining. The last decade has seen intensifying pressure on the mining industry to demonstrate its contribution to development. This is evident in the increasingly wide range of international sustainability and human rights frameworks available for companies to endorse. In this webinar, Anthony will present research developed by CSRM with support from SMI's Complex Ore Bodies program, comprising of 11 elements that together constitute a strategic review of a company's social performance function. As always, you can submit your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen at any time during the presentation. And at the end, I will put the questions to Anthony. Anthony, over to you. Look forward to the seminar.
Thank you, Neville, and thank you, Rick. It's great to be here and to be talking about the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining, or CSRM's research in this area. For those who have attended other SMI seminars, I just want to be clear that unlike some of those other seminars, this one isn't to present research results. What I'm here to present today is an approach to research being developed at CSRM. So in a nutshell, the research focuses on how companies organise for social performance. And by way of definition, what is social performance? So as a working definition, let's say that social performance is what businesses do in relation to mine-affected communities. I've underlined the word "do" there on the screen because I want to emphasize the performance aspect of social performance. So social performance isn't having documents or standards or policies. It's the physical and technical activities that occur in the interface between a mining company and its host communities. So when I talk to people about social performance, I find that often there's a very different picture in people's minds as to what that includes. So social performance does include community engagement, but does extend beyond that. It extends, for example, to working through land acquisition issues, to negotiating agreements with host communities, to undertaking technical studies to understand the significance of cultural heritage within a mining lease. It extends to coordinating with local communities and governments to manage the economic impacts of mine closure. And I think the point here is that social performance encompasses a really wide range of responsibilities that requires specific technical expertise. And in accordance, what is a social performance or SP function? When I talk about the function, I mean a business unit with technical capability for social performance. I'm not saying that it's the function that's responsible for social performance, because like in many, like many other functions within, say, a mining company, lots of different parts of the business carry responsibility for social performance, just like in safety. The structure of today's seminar is in 3 parts. I want to spend quite a bit of time setting the scene about social performance and mining and what industry is facing today. Then I want to introduce the strategic review. And then finally, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what's next. So in terms of setting the scene, I want to focus on 3 pressures or pressure rises that are facing the mining industry today. I want to look at demand for metals and minerals. I want to look at community and international expectations being placed on the industry. And then I want to look at the current media landscape and the visibility of mining incidents. So we know that the outlook for metals and minerals is that the demand for metals is projected to increase significantly over the coming decades. And this is borne out in reports like the OECD Global Materials Resources Outlook, that's on screen there, as well as in academic research, like this paper from 2018. This paper in particular suggests that recycling isn't likely to be enough to meet future metals demands of the 7 metal studies. And under 4 different scenarios, it suggests that demand is actually going to be doubling or tripling over the next few decades. What this really means is that mining activities, mining production is likely to increase in future. At the same time, recent research coming out of the Sustainable Minerals Institute shows that mining is pushing into areas that carry environmental, social, and governance risks, or ESG risks, and that these risks could constrain future metal supplies. And these risks are also not easily dealt with by mere increases in commodity price. So we have this paper from Valenta et al., as well as this one from Lebra and colleagues here at the SMI. And the intersection between the likelihood of increased mining in future, as well as risks to environmental and to ESG risks, is borne out in the renewable energy space. So this is a recent World Bank report indicating that mineral production is likely to soar as demand for clean energy increases. And this recent article, this is out of the conversation in the public domain, but it's based on a very recent, sort of 5 days ago, publication in Nature Communications, shows that renewable energy production is also likely to push into areas with environmental risks. So what does this mean in terms of the scene? It means that mining is likely to increase in the coming decades, but that increase in mining is likely to involve greater risks in the ESG space. The second part of the scene that I want to bring to your attention is about expectations at the international and more local levels. So over the last 20 years or so, there has been a real accumulation of international standards, commitments, and expectations that are relevant to the mining industry. Here's a brief snapshot. It's by no means a comprehensive catalogue, but we have voluntary principles on security and human rights coming out in the year 2000. This isn't so much a standard or commitment, but the MMSD was a research project that really placed mining as, really situated mining as having a role in sustainable development. We have the ICMM, the International Council on Mining and Metals, having a sustainable development framework for its member companies, 2003. We have the Kimberley process for diamonds in 2003. This is the John Ruggie's report on a framework for business and human rights in 2008, which was then formalized into the UNGPs in 2011. International Finance Corporation Performance Standards, 2012. Conflict-Free Gold Standard, also 2012. Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, Modern Slavery Act in the UK and subsequently other jurisdictions in 2015, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative Standard 2019 with origins a bit earlier, and the Mining Principles Performance Expectations this year from the ICMM. So all of this is to say that these standards and principles reflect a fairly deep debate about where mining sits within societies. Is it a business that's entitled to pursue its commercial self-interest as long as it acts within the law, or is there an additional imperative to act as good citizens? And if so, what does that mean in practice? And to be clear, this isn't a debate that exists solely within the mining industry. And I want to point out that in 2011, this fairly widespread article in the Harvard Business Review raised the question about should businesses be looking to create shared value for the societies in which they exist. And I don't want to dwell too deeply into that, but the point here is that there is a broader debate about the place of businesses in society, and then a more specific debate about mining in society. So those are the international level expectations, or at least a snapshot into them. We also know that there are increasing local and regional expectations, mainly around two aspects. First is that the benefits of mining are shared with host communities, say through employment and procurement, but also through the payment of royalties. And also that environmental and social risks are acceptable to host communities, whatever acceptance means. So again, a brief snapshot into situations where community expectations about mining have escalated and made media. So issues in Peru, PNG, Philippines, and here in Australia. So the scene, that part of the scene was about expectations internationally and at more local scales facing the mining industry. The last scene setter that I want to point out is visibility. And the focus here is about the media cycles of today. And you might also have heard the saying, which I quite like, it's probably not literally true, but the internet is forever. That once something is on the internet, it can be found, it can be dug up, it can be put together and shared really widely. So the result really is that major incidents, while rare and not representative of the industry as a whole, are rapidly worked into the public consciousness. Before I move to the next slide, I just want to flag that the next slides show headlines that show real tragedy, that affect people traumatically and might have an effect on you. So please be warned that they're coming up. So these are just headlines that show major incidents that have really hit news headlines and, as I mentioned before, have really worked into the public consciousness of the risks of mining. And I also, because of the recency of the next example, I don't want to dwell on it as an incident, but it's so recent and so timely that I want to acknowledge this recent incident, the destruction of the Juukan Gorge in the Pilbara. Being the subject of an ongoing inquiry and also recognizing the limitations of my own knowledge on this case, I don't want to comment on the case itself, but I do want to focus on how sometimes mining incidents can come together with other non-mining events to increase the visibility of a mining event. So the destruction of Juukan Gorge happened in late May, 24th and 25th of May, with the news breaking around the 26th of May. At the same time, in the US, George Floyd's death occurred on the 25th of May, US time, so 26th in our time. The 26th of May was also National Sorry Day, which kicks off National Reconciliation Week. And all of that together, not in any particularly causative way, but it comes together in Black Lives Matter protests. And I want to be clear that I'm not putting together these events as particularly causative. I don't think there's a really clear direct link between these. But what I want to say is that it seems, at least I can say, that mining incidents can sometimes involve much broader and more deeply embedded social currents, which magnifies the visibility of mining in the public consciousness. And all that together suggests that there's an increasing pressure on the industry to perform. So this is demand for mining products, which drives mining into areas of ESG risk. There's increasing expectations from local and international levels and higher visibility in the public consciousness. So pressure to perform what? And if you recall at the start of this presentation, I talked about social performance as being as the doing part of things. It's the pressure to actively manage how mining affects people in host communities. So that's the scene. What's the strategic research focus of this presentation? And by way of introduction, I want to highlight that the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining has developed research expertise on a broad range of mining issues. So these include resettlement, agreement making, conflict in mining, development, sustainable development, Indigenous peoples, economic developments, cultural heritage, community safety and security, and others. These are issues, but this strategic review, this research, is not about studying issues on an issue by issue basis. Rather, what we're really doing is we're focusing on companies as the topic of study. We're looking at organizational governance of social performance. So how does social performance happen within companies? And this is an area that's been running at CSRM in some form or another since CSRM's inception, and it predates my involvement in the centre. But given the scene setting that I went through earlier, we think the timing is right to develop a more structured research approach. But particularly, we've observed over the years that social performance is not generally represented at high levels of corporate decision-making. There has been a dismantling or divestment of social performance functions within companies, or a restructuring from, say, health, security, environment, and communities into more of a corporate affairs role. And in some companies, there's been a change in senior personnel, which changes how companies organize themselves for social performance. What you see on the screen there, the two report covers, are part of a mining and social performance project that was also supported by the Complex Ore Bodies program here at the Sustainable Minerals Institute. These are publicly available on the link there, but it gives you an insight into our position and our thinking in this space to date. So what is this review about? And this is the strategic review that we have developed to structure our thinking in this area going forwards. The focus question that we've landed on is looking at a particular company and asking, is the company's social performance function fit for purpose? This question can be broken down into three parts. To understand whether something is fit for purpose, we firstly need to understand what that purpose is. Then part two is understanding the function as it exists. So characterizing and describing what constitutes that function within a company. And then lastly, looking towards improvement. How can we position the function towards better effectiveness? Within each of these three parts, we have multiple elements. So in the first part, we have 4 research activities. One is to look at the environment, social, and governance risks facing the jurisdictions in which a mining company's assets are located. And that uses publicly available data sets that are overlaid spatially and can be disaggregated by mine stage. So this would show us where, for example, a risk profile currently facing a company differs from the risks that are facing the company's assets that are in an earlier stage of development. And this tells us in future what are the kinds of risks that the company might be facing. We have 2 components involving interviews, so that's the social performance strategy and vision, and perspectives from outside social performance. And these really target social performance staff within the company, as well as high-level leaders, so site general managers, all the way up to executive level, to understand how social performance is administered and viewed within the business as a whole. We also look at incentives for social performance. How is social performance incentivized in terms of performance standards for staff? There are 4 components that make up the part 2, the characterizing of the function. And I won't go into each of these, but mostly it's there to gather evidence to characterize what is the company working with. It's looking at what are the resources, what are the expertises, what's the system, the management systems that are in place, whether that's explicit or implicit in their practice. And then finally, the positioning is about looking at deep dive case studies, benchmarking commitments against other companies, and a future directions workshop, which is the culmination of this research program. So a future directions workshop is where we as researchers engage in a dialogue with the company to synthesize all of these components and say, well, what's really next for you? Where do you want to take this? We have rolled out some of these components separately, and we are in the midst of rolling out all of them for an international mining company. And what we're finding is that so far, what we're finding is that sometimes the function's purpose isn't clear within a company. So then we really need to look at, well, what are the kinds of changes that you can make within the structures that you've set up, and what's really feasible for that? One of the points I want to make is that all of these, apart from that final directions workshop, is effectively primary research activities. So what's really exciting to me is that we are bringing research to bear on what is a strategic problem facing the industry as a whole, but will also be useful for companies. To formalize that a little bit, the key points in this design that I want to point out is that firstly, it is evidence-based. So we've got an opportunity in rolling this out to get deep insights based on fairly comprehensive company data. I'm really also excited that we have access to industry personnel all the way up to CEO level and through the hierarchy to line staff. And it's also cross-disciplinary. So this cuts across mining, social sciences, and organizational governance. What's next? So we have this research design and we are in the process of rolling it out in its entirety for one company, and we have some parts that have been conducted for, in more bitsy ways for other companies. What's next? In terms of research, we see that there are 2 potential outputs. The first is that this is as a package of research, this is a novel methodology and can be written up as a methods paper. And of course, the findings, particularly if there are multiple companies where we can see patterns of organizations, this can be written up as a research finding in and of itself. I also think there's definitely a PhD project in here, and I think it will be ideal for cross-institutional research. I think this is a space of research that sits comfortably within the Sustainable Minerals Institute, but also in business schools, in the sort of organizational governance space. And I would really be glad to delve into that a bit more. As a package of research, there's also a development opportunity, particularly for early career researchers, because this research brings researchers in really close contact with industry. The interviewees and the participants are industry. It can only be rolled out with industry partners. It's a fantastic opportunity for developing industry engaged researchers. And as far as research impact goes, what are our goals? I think that what this is really driving towards is not research for its own sake, but we're looking to have a mining industry, or to help the mining industry develop to a point where social performance is capable of managing the risks of mining to host communities, where the function is governed by coherent strategy, policies, and standards, and that's consistent across the industry. where the function has influence in company decisions, and it's integrated with the other functions. And this is where we talk about the function can push into other functions, so they can come in and investigate things and provide assurance, but it's also pulled in as part of broad company decision making. And finally, where the function is well resourced, so it has the budget, the expertise, the staff hours allocated for it to do the job it needs to do. If we can, this research program won't by itself achieve this, but our hope is that in using research to clarify the needs of social performance and the state of social performance for one or more companies, we can help influence the industry in this direction. That's all I have for today. I'm going to leave that ahead. I can see there's some Q&A, but Neville, I might return back to you to manage the Q&A here.
Right, Anthony, thank you very much for the presentation, and I suppose for posing a number of really challenging questions. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, so we'll go into those straight away. And just looking through them, I think you've partly answered some of them, but let's work our way through them. So the first one is, would the strategic review actually prevent those major incidents that have high visibility?
Yeah, great question, and of course very topical in people's minds right now. I think that the answer I'm going to give is this: the more that companies resource for and think about social performance, the more likely they are to be aware of and catch incidents like this. I am not a safety expert, and I don't want to draw too close an analogy, but I'm reminded of how a real culture of safety and safety being everyone's responsibility, and that kind of approach, I think, has relevance to social performance. So no, I don't think that necessarily anybody can guarantee major incidents from happening, but we want to have organizations that are paying attention to the possibility of high visibility incidents, not just for visibility reasons, but because those incidents are they're high visibility because they cause harm. We want organizations to be paying attention to those and organizing to prevent them and managing them actively rather than retroactively.
Right, thank you, Anthony. The next one builds on that, and it goes that the review you're doing, you said, was not issues-based. But hypothetically, could you do a review on a specific issue, like gender or like a company's approach to conflict?
Yeah, there's certainly no barrier to that. And in some of the reviews that we are doing, we have been asked to look specifically at, say, how a company is organized for human rights. There's definitely no barrier to that. I think it's a little bit more of a helicopter view because, these issues are not they're not standalone. I mean, sometimes we take the filter of an issue to look at, through a particular lens, right? And we sort of say, well, we're interested in this, and mentally, or we can discard anything that doesn't necessarily fall within that for the purposes of the analysis. If the subject of study, though, is how well is a company organized to deal with conflict, then we start to get a bit of leaching beyond that issue. It's, well, what led to the conflict? Is it hidden or latent tensions within a community? And if and are those more hidden or more subtle currents within that community being picked up by a mining company? And if it's not, then why not? And that you can see there that already very quickly moves into a broader area of social performance. It's how is a company organized to understand its communities, to record that knowledge, and to operationalize that knowledge within the company. And so, yes, there can be an issue-specific review on how a company is organized, but I think that generally it will broaden very, very quickly, and it might be a false scoping.
All right. I suppose another quick one, and then we've got a couple of really interesting questions coming up as well. How is this different to the a McKinsey review?
In my extensive experience of zero as a McKinsey consultant, I'm not really. I don't have any specific insights on that. My initial thought with that caveat is that I would expect that a management consulting review is really focused on advancing the business interest. And this is, the focus will be, how do we optimize our business to achieve the business outcomes? One of the themes and messages that the CSRM has been developing is that there is a difference between the risks posed by companies to communities and the risks posed to the business by communities. And our contention is that those things rebound. But where a company is really focused on risks to business rather than risks to communities, there can be a potential for harm to occur in host communities, and for that not to be caught because the business is, or not to be caught in time before it escalates to something, because the business is not organized to pick up the outgoing risks early. So I am not sure, I don't have enough specificity to answer that question, but I would generally point towards the distinction between social risks coming into the business and social risks of the business going out to communities.
All right. Next one. Often a company has high social environmental performance objectives, but these can be displaced by the need to meet even more pressing objectives of profitability. So a program established by one manager can be dismantled rapidly by a successor. How can your research lead to more consistent behavior by management?
Yeah, that's a really that's super interesting question, and no easy answers. Where we hope to exert influence on industry is in engaging at the level of executive decision makers. So even through the process of having interviews and challenging executive level interviewees, we can ask, what is the purpose of your company? Is it to be a good corporate citizen for the duration of your operations and then leave the site with no liabilities? Or is it to leave a positive legacy in your host communities? And those are very different purposes. So I think the first part of the answer to that question is this research hopes to generate conversations at the level of executive. And because of the leadership role of the executive, we hope that that will filter through the rest of the company. You know, there's lots of examples of strong leadership making enormous organizational change with further influence. The second part of that is we are also looking at structures and systems. So this is not it's not, for example, restricted to a community investment program. If companies pay attention to this research, and we hope they do, we hope that what will happen is that there is a structural change or a structural recognition about who reports to who, where does the accountability flow, and I would expect that to be more resistant to changes in personnel than a standalone program that can be funded or defunded based on the circumstances of the time.
All right. This question is, how would you, I'm going to assume, create a space for community participation in the process of defining social performance indicators?
How would you look for space for community social performance indicators? I'm not sure whether Sorry, just to pause, Neville, here, Zoom is telling me that Rick Valenta would like to answer this question live.
No, I think
No.
Rick just making sure that I don't miss any questions.
Oh, I see.
I'm afraid you're all on your own, Anthony.
So how would you look for basic communication indicators?
So I think it's really, how do you get community participation?
Yeah, in indicators of performance, I think this is a question that would be in some ways outside the scope of the review. But if I were to offer my my general opinion, I think it's very important to have community participation, understanding what a company considers to be good social performance. This, I would imagine, and I would suggest, originates from the knowledgeable staff at sites who have really deep insight into how the host community works and their aspirations and their concerns. And the question that, where this intersects with our review is, how does that knowledge make it all the way up into a company-wide decision-making process? So you have community engagement staff that are working with local communities day in, day out, and in many cases are from those communities. How does that translate not just to site, but also to a company level understanding of that? And this, I think, is in the review. And for us, it comes down to management systems. It comes down to the structures. It comes down to whether there's a voice for social performance people at the highest level of company decision making. I hope that answers the question.
No, Anthony,
yeah.
thank you. I think what I'll do is just bounce to Rick, because I think Rick had a question, and then I'll go back. We've got about 4 or 5 more questions online, and I'm hoping we'll have enough time to get to all of those, because you've left us quite a bit of time for questions. So thanks for that. Rick, I don't know if you want to ask your question.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Neville, and thanks, Anthony, for a really enjoyable presentation. So my question is, it's around the content of the review. So I guess one of the challenges, and I know that a lot of us, I think, including you and I, have discussed this before, and that one of the challenges around this area is that companies have such a strong focus on earnings, cost, profitability, and value. And at the same time, I think everybody in companies, but also who are studying this phenomenon, or these, social performance in general, realize that there are enormous challenges around quantifying the value of social performance. So on the one hand, saying, well, what's the value of good social performance? So it's easier to look at some recent debacles and say, well, we can easily kind of recognize the negative value of poor social performance. And so my question is your review going to consider whether companies are making efforts to ascribe value to their social performance, and if so, how they do it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question about what is the business value of social performance.
Yeah.
And I think, so to answer the specific question of how does this review deal with that question, it will largely come out in both the interviews with company decision makers as to, is there a statement on that, but also checking to see whether that's been adequately resourced. If there is a discrepancy between those, then it does raise questions about, you have these aspirations, but the company isn't investing in the function. Why not? And I think that becomes, that would uncover for me an implicit position about whether the company does see a business value in social performance. I think the broader question about acknowledging the business value of social performance can be seen in some of this the Sustainable Minerals Institute research on the cost of conflict, as well as Valenta et al. And the work on future supplies being dependent on on managing ESG risks. The question, though, of whether that valuation is happening at companies? I'm not sure whether we would explicitly get to that, but it's certainly an area that I would be looking to press into. Yeah, very interesting question, Rick.
All right, Anthony, the next question actually sort of builds on that. And it says really, drawing on your distinction between social performance and the social performance function, it seems the review is focusing on the social performance function and how it is fit for purpose. Is that deliberate? And then would it be useful to study how company execs achieve social performance also beyond the social performance function? And I think that is an incredibly insightful question. I don't know if you've got any comments on that.
I do. I think, yes, that's right. The argument for us runs something like this. The more robust a social performance function, the more likely the social performance itself would be better. And as a matter of scoping, we've bitten off the chunk, which says, look at the explicit and implicit structures. What are the hidden ways, the invisible ways to the outside eye in which a company tries to achieve social performance? The link between that and actual social performance, I think is a much bigger question. And it's very important. And in giving this answer, I don't want to diminish the importance of that for us. It's a matter of looking at this specific issue, because there is evidence that poorly organized function results in worse outcomes. There's another part of that question, which is how does the company achieve or execute social performance function outside of the social performance outside of the function itself? And I want to say, yes, absolutely. This is also part of our review. The branching out beyond the formal function, the formal business unit, into other areas of the business is designed to allow us to understand the interface between the function and other parts of the business. So depending on the company and its structure, we would be looking to talk to non-social performance executive level people, site-based GM who might have line-based oversight for social performance staff at site. That to us is an important part of this review.
All right, Anthony, thank you. And it also touches on the work that we're doing within the strategic program, looking at governance and leadership, and what is the role of leadership in achieving better outcomes in terms of health and safety, environmental performance, as well as social performance. So it's a really good topic in terms of how do we enable better performance through better leadership. All right. The significance of company social performance is heightened through the trend to self-regulation. What external pressures would assist in meeting the social performance goals outlined?
Yeah.
So I suppose internal versus external regulation.
Yes, I think that there is I would firstly observe that the external pressures depend significantly or very significantly based on context, on the jurisdiction in which an asset is being operated. I think that one of the things that we're hearing from mining companies, or that I'm hearing from mining companies, is that there is a question of whether a mining company, so joins the club, they say, do we sign up to more reporting requirements? But there is a risk there that in signing up to more and more commitments, that seems like there's greater accountability, but in some ways it's not having a practical effect in the actual performance part of SP. So I think what external pressures would assist in meeting social performance goals outlined. I think the additional commitments, I'm agnostic about those. I'm not willing to make a pronouncement on that. But one thing that is interesting is the increase in investor attention on ESG. And I know that that Professor Deanna Kemp, who's the Centre Director here at CSRM, has been engaging in investor circles about this. I think that there is an increasing demand from investors for companies to demonstrate social outcomes as well as financial returns. So not a very clear answer for me, I'm afraid, but I think that I'm interested to see where investor pressure goes as far as external pressures pushing companies to putting in place some of these measures.
All right. Next question. How deep does all this go at the site level? These sites are sometimes complex, in remote and vulnerable contexts. To what extent does the review actually touch the ground? It sounds very top-down. Surely the helicopter view would have to be complemented with a deeply fine-grained picture of what's going on, if this is all about what companies do. Could you comment on how the approach method accounts for the site-based realities and community realities?
Yeah, I think that the picking of helicopter view is very astute there. I think and admittedly, this is only mostly rather a helicopter view based on how the company as a whole is structuring itself. We absolutely recognize that site-based realities are not only very nuanced but change drastically from site to site. For us, this is the subject of study. It's how the company as a whole is organizing itself. We do have one component, which is a deep dive case study. We do want to gather perspectives from people at site, and that is part of the research. But for sure, there is more to do, and that is connecting a helicopter view with how things actually happen on a site-by-site basis. So same data, perhaps just cut in different ways. So we might be looking at resourcing as a component, but then we might divide that on a site-by-site level to then see what's happening. So yes, part of it, absolutely. Site level nuances are very important, and not taking that into account would be unrealistic.
Yeah, and understanding the disconnect between the policy and the practice, I think, is really important, if there is one. All right. Does your method attempt to quantify the financial return on investment from social performance? I think this was in line with what Rick's question was, which is what is most convincing to companies. So avoidance of catastrophes, avoidance of conflict, they all have financial costs.
Not here. That would be really interesting, but not in our method. If you wanted, please, I would love that. That would be, it would be great to have a line of evidence that we could tie into this. Unfortunately, it's not within the scope.
But I think we have got a couple of reference documents, Daniel Frank's cost of conflict work. So we can definitely look at that. Here's a good question. How do you seek out industry partners?
How do we seek out industry partners? Well, such is the activity, the industriousness and reputation of the SMI leadership, Neville, that we have a network of industry partners. How do we seek them out? I would like to think that by producing quality research that's relevant and timely, industry partners come to us as an institute that has expertise for them. I certainly am very grateful for the opportunities that have come by in my position. I'm not sure I can answer that so much. This is very much a strategic positioning of the Institute and CSRM that's led us to a position where we can be engaging consistently with really great industry partners.
Yeah, I think we encourage as many people as possible to engage with us. And I noticed in the chat there's been a request to make contact, and we will do that. And if anybody online would like further information, there are a number of ways of connecting with us. The easiest is to drop me an email or go onto our website, and there, it should be fairly easy to get our contacts if there's anything of interest that you'd like to follow up on. Next question, and then I think we'll call it a day after that, because I know we're coming close to the end of the hour, and I just want to pick up on the next week's seminar. So the question is, who pays for the study? If companies are paying, can they influence the findings and make the company look great?
Yeah, a great question, and one that we, you know, as well, I don't want to speak for the centre, but certainly something that is very carefully planned here, which is to maintain our research independence. There's a couple of ways that there's a couple of responses that I want to give to this. I think the first is for this work, the research output is not publicized in a way that directly names companies. And that's partly because our access to behind the scenes of companies is often conditioned on the idea of some kind of confidentiality being maintained. And that way we get some insights, but we can also report those in ways that all research participants are comfortable with, like in any other research. So in doing so, what we found is that the companies who engage us for this kind of research are genuinely wanting to know how they can do better. This is never going to be a puff piece for the company, because by nature it's a very introspective. It's a guided introspection through use of research evidence. So I think that's answer number one. Answer number two is that I really am impressed with the consortiums that CSRM has. So there's a social aspects of mine closure consortium and a resettlement consortium. And the structure of these are that companies, industry partners, as well as the university, pool funding to collaboratively come up with a direction that CSRM can, you know, really push into, and you know that work is centre-led with inputs from industry, and in some ways that's you know, it's because it's funded by multiple partners. There's there's less potential for any one company to influence findings. That's not a complete answer to the question, but I just want to say that, yeah, this is something that we really are active in maintaining our research independence. Rick.
What, Rick?
Oh, sorry, Rick's got his hand up. Sorry, Neville.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Anthony's already mentioned that that some of this work is supported by the university's strategic funding of our complex ore bodies program, and what we've done in the past is to use that funding, which is not tied to any company, to carry out some of these cross-industry studies, and you know, therefore the work is not being funded by a specific company, and there's not really an indication that or you know, it's a situation therefore where there's not you nobody could point to it later and say, oh, you guys are just sort of mouthing the you know, whatever the people who funded you are telling you to say, which doesn't happen, as Anthony says anyway. But so, you know, that's been because this is a really strategic challenge for the industry. We've been able to you know, get this complex ore bodies funding over 5 years, which is not tied to companies, though it is, often working in collaboration with companies. So a lot of these cross-industry studies are actually funded by that, by that source rather than company funding.
All right, Anthony, well, thank you very much. And I suppose just leaves me to close out the seminar and thank you for your presentation today. And we really look forward to the study as it goes forward, and we'll probably invite you back in a couple of, probably about 6 months' time to come and give us further feedback on what you found. In terms of next week, the presentation next week will be uranium in sediment and its significance from the life of mine at Ranger Mine, Northern Territory. And this will be presented by Dr. Barry Noller from the Centre for Mine Land Rehabilitation. And we look forward to seeing everyone again next week at the same time. And if you have missed any of the webinars, there's been a series happening during the year. You can find them on the SMI website, and that is smi.uq.edu.au. Thank you very much, everybody. Look forward to seeing you again next week. Cheers.